Hello, I'm Jim Isenberg from the Chino Valley Church of Christ in Chino Valley, Arizona. And today we're going to be looking at Daniel 6. I'll be reading from the New International Version, verses 1 to 5. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." Daniel was considered so trustworthy that he was put in charge of holding others accountable. This alone is admirable enough. However, his wisdom began to set him apart from others so that they became jealous of, so much so that they became jealous of him. Daniel was so committed to God that the only way his enemies could trap him was through his religious beliefs and practices. Got a question for you. What are you known for? We're all known for something. Daniel was known for being such a godly man that the only way these enemies of his could trap him was to find him being was to find something in which it would be religious in nature to trap him. And that's what they're going to do next year. Let's look at verses 6 to 9. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, may King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, the prefects, the satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. This was a lie. Not everyone agreed to this. Daniel didn't agree to this. As to why the king agreed to it, I'm sure he was flattered. But from a pragmatic point of view, signing such an edict could aid in bringing about greater unity in his culturally diverse kingdom. Does this sound familiar? Do we not have people today that will cancel you or perhaps get you fired if you don't agree with their cultural understandings of morality or of life? This is nothing new, where people say, let's all side with one perspective here, and because of that, if you disagree, we're going to throw you in a lion's den. Let's look at verses 10 to 13. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. Notice their language. One of the exiles from Judah. Well, why does that matter? Have you ever been guilty of adding more information to a story that you're telling or to some account that you're giving, because you know that if you add a little more information, it might just sweeten the deal a little bit for you. Okay, they're trying to push things in a way that makes Daniel look bad. He's not one of us. He's one of those exiles from Judah. They also say that Daniel pays no heed to you, pays no attention to you. Daniel respected the king. Daniel just realized that there's a greater king to obey, right? How prepared are you to obey God and not man? How prepared are you to obey God and not man? We can sit here and say all we want that, oh, I will never deny Jesus. I'll give my life for the Lord, and maybe you will. I'm not trying to, discourage you in that. But the Apostle Peter said the same thing. I will never deny Jesus. And Jesus told him, you're going to deny me 3 times. We've got to get our minds very determined, brothers and sisters. Almost said church, but that's okay. You're the church if you're a Christian listening to me. We've got to get our minds firm, set firm on how committed we are to the Lord. Is he really the master of our life, or is he just another compartment in our heart that we kind of pull out when we need some problem solved? 14 to 18. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until the sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. King Darius certainly has a conscience. He apparently tries to find a legal means to pardon Daniel. The real intent of these conspirators is now obvious. They could have simply ignored what Daniel had done. They didn't have to press charges, so to speak. They could have also helped the king find a loophole in the law to save Daniel. Instead, they only reminded the king that his hands were tied. When do people start getting interested in the law? Is it not when the law will serve their personal advantage or their personal agenda? At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Daniel still shows respect to the king. O king, live forever, he says. He attests that he was spared because he was found blameless. I tend to think that this is what the angel told him, and not something he is saying to brag about himself. He also attests that he has done no wrong against the king. Rulers are forbidden from making laws that go against the law of God. Rulers are forbidden from making laws that go against the law of God. Now, I'm not saying they don't make laws that go against the law of God. They do. But as Christians, as followers of Christ, we are not obligated to obey any law that goes against the law of God. They don't have that kind of power, in other words. They do not have the power to supersede something that God has already said. Let's look at 25 to 28. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every nation in all the earth. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is becoming a familiar theme. Both Nebuchadnezzar and now King Darius acknowledge the power of Yahweh. However, they never acknowledge him as the only true God, but as the most powerful among all gods. Question for you. Are we convinced through our actions that there is only one God? We can say we believe in one God, and we should. I hope we do. But sometimes our actions might say that we've got other gods in our lives. Gods of money, gods of prosperity, gods of vanity, gods of pleasure, gods of selfishness. These are these can creep up and become little gods in our lives, whether we make idols to them or not. So let's keep in mind, our lives need to be focused on serving God's interests on this earth. Here's some incidental notes that I've come up with about Daniel 6. Ancient Eastern customs were such that the execution of punishment was carried out in the evening of the day in which a person was found guilty. This would explain why Darius waited until the evening to throw Daniel into the lion's den and spent the time up to the evening trying to find a way to get him cleared. Darius had the families of the satraps thrown into the lion's den as well. This is certainly severe, but such was the customs of the Persians at that time. Daniel's account is not intended as a commentary on the moral or ethical behavior of pagan rulers, although we see where they went wrong, but as an account of God's working on behalf of his people while in Babylon. Solomon's prayer in 1 Kings 8:29 to 30 may have been the reason Daniel chose to pray toward Jerusalem. May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, this place of which you said, my name shall be there, so that you will hear the prayer your servant prays toward this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. The fate of Daniel's enemies was illustrated years earlier by David in Psalm 57:6. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. We can see the gospel story in Daniel 6. A blameless man is accused of breaking the law by those who are jealous of him. This man is thrown into a pit of death, and a large stone is placed over its opening. The stone is removed, and this man walks out alive. Men give glory to God for such a miracle, and his story gets told to future generations. Daniel showed great courage during a time of testing. Why? Perhaps Daniel drew courage from David. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. 1 Samuel 17:37. That was when David was referring to Goliath. Save me from the lion's mouth, from the horns of the wild oxen, you answer me. I'm sure Daniel was inspired by what happened to his fellow Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in chapter 3, when they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Perhaps he drew strength from Joshua's command to Israel. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord thy God is with you. What does Romans 10:17 tell us about faith? Faith cometh by hearing. Consider all these things I've quoted. Daniel knew his scriptures. He knew these things, okay? Remember, he had been taught by King Josiah, possibly, okay, who brought revival to Israel when they found the book of the law buried in the temple and dug it out. And King Josiah said, let's read this and start applying this. That's when Daniel's formative years came along. Daniel also looked forward to something better than the riches and prestige of Babylon. Let's look at Hebrews 12 real quick here, and then we'll wrap up. Hebrews 12 is talking about great men and women of faith. Again, peoples whose stories have been recorded for us to read and draw inspiration from, for our faith to get built. Faith cometh through hearing. And the Hebrew writer says this in verse 1 of Hebrews 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. What did it say there about Jesus? For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. We have something better to look forward to than riches in this world, which are transitory and like James says, don't store treasures on earth where, or like Jesus said, don't store your treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves come in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Thank you for your time. God bless.